So take a look at this image. Is this how genetics works? Explain how this picture is accurate or inaccurate. This is a family that is all genetically related. These two girls are fraternal twins, so the type of twins that are just as genetically related as sisters would be, not identical. So are children just a mix of their parents' genetics, like the first picture? Explain why or why not, and use the second picture to back up your claim. So in the 1800s, people knew that inheritance was not just a mixture of people's genes. If that was the case, less common traits like red hair would be watered down in every generation until that trait didn't exist. And today we know that that's not true. And in the 1800s, they knew that that wasn't true also. And today we're going to talk about the guy who learned and began to crack that code. His name was Gregor Mendel. He was born in 1822. He trained himself to be a naturalist. He worked as a substitute science teacher, but failed the qualifying exams to be a high school science teacher. He joined a monastery, and they sent him to a university to study science and math. And he loved to garden and to learn about genetics. So if you care to, you can pause the video to take a look at this comic. And again, you can pause the video if you want to read this comic that summarizes what he did. All right, so he used pea plants to learn about inheritance, and they worked great because they had many different traits, and the traits all came in pairs. So what is the opposite of a round pea? What trait is the opposite of a yellow pea pod? Another reason why peas were really great is because they are called a perfect flower, meaning that they have both male and female parts, so they can fertilize themselves. So if you look at this image down here, this part's called the stigma. That's the female part. That symbol means female. And down here, you've got the male part, which is the anther and the filament. This has the pollen, and that symbol means the male part. Stamen is the male part. So again, another reason why pea plants were awesome is that Mendel could cut the anther or the male part off to control which flowers were pollinated which. So instead of just letting the bees pollinate whichever plants with whichever other ones, he could cut off the part with the pollen, and so that he knew which pea plants were being crossed with other ones. And this is how he did it. He would collect pollen using a paintbrush, and then the one that he wanted to cross it with, he would cut off the stamens or the part that had pollen on that flower and just fertilize it or cross-pollinate it with the paintbrush. So why were pea plants good to study inheritance? All right, so before Mendel began his experiments, he spent 2 years breeding purebred pea plants. And a purebred is when it's crossed with another purebred, the offspring have the exact same traits as the parents. So you might be familiar with this term in dog breeds. So when you have a purebred poodle and you cross it with another purebred poodle, all of the offspring are going to have all those poodle traits. And same with pea plants. 2 short pea plants that are purebred are always going to have 100% of their offspring are going to be short, and same with tall pea plants. So predict what genotype would represent a purebred organism. All right, so Mendel did 2 different important experiments. The first experiment he did, he crossed a tall purebred pea plant with a short purebred pea plant. What do you think the offspring will be like? He found that the offspring were 100% tall. Obviously, he did not just get 4 pea plants when he crossed these 2 peas. He got many, but I'm using 4 because we can talk about 25% of them, 50% of them, 75 or 100. But when he did this, he always discovered that 100% of them were tall after doing it several times. And this first set of offspring are called the first filial, or F1, because filial means son in Latin. So go ahead and summarize what Mendel learned in his first experiment. All right, in his second experiment, he took 2 of the pea plants from the first filial generation. Yes, he was breeding siblings together, but they're just plants, don't make it weird. And what do you think the offspring are going to be like? These not purebred tall plants. Mendel found that when he did this, 75% of the offspring were tall and 25% were short. Again, after doing this over and over, he did not just get 4 pea plants, but this represents 25%, 50, 75% of them being tall and just 25% being short. And this second generation is called the second filial, so F2. And notice that Kennedy Jr. looks just like their great-grandp, which was short, purebred short. So go ahead and summarize what Mendel learned in his second experiment. So Mendel tried this many times with many different traits, not just tall and short, and he always had the same outcome, which was pretty incredible. And this led Mendel to develop the 3 laws of inheritance. So I'm going to go through the 3 laws, and please write these down. These are super important. The first law is called the law of independent assortment. This means that all organisms contain 2 units of heredity from their parents, and today we call them alleles, and that's why we represent like your PTC tasting with a capital T or a lowercase t, but you have 2 T's in you. So go ahead and in your notebook draw a picture about what that law means. All right, the second law is called the law of dominance. This is that all organisms can have any combination of 2 alleles, but when one of the alleles is dominant, it shows the dominant trait. So go ahead and draw a picture of what that law means in your notebook. And don't forget to write the law down also. All right, last one is called the law of segregation. This means this law is during gamete formation, alleles separate randomly into different gametes. So there is no, like, dominant alleles are not more likely to be passed down than recessive alleles. It is totally random. Go ahead and draw a picture of what that law means in your notebook. All right, so now we understand the experiments even more today, and we can do Punnett squares with them. So now we understand that purebred tall would be capital T, and purebred short would be little t, and if we did a Punnett square, we would come out with all of the offspring having 1 tall and 1 short allele, showing the dominant tall trait. And then if we did experiment 2, we could do another Punnett square, and if you cross these 2 not purebred P's, you would get 25% with 2 dominant alleles, 50% with a dominant and a recessive, and 25% with 2 recessive alleles. That's why only 25% of the offspring were short. So it's pretty crazy that without even ever seeing a gene, Mendel concluded that heredity is controlled by these atoms of inheritance, that's what he called them, which never break or bend, maintaining their character from generation to generation. Lord knows they must be tiny. All right, so again, is this how it works? Explain.